This is an interview with Helen Wagner on September 18th, 2009 in Cooper, Texas. My name is Jim Conrad, and this will become part of the Texas A&M University Oral History program. I want to thank you for coming today to be interviewed for our project. I think what you have to tell us is important. It needs to be preserved and shared with other people, particularly the young people. And I usually like to start out with a little information on the person's background. Can you tell me where you were born?
I was born here in Cooper, Texas in 1938 to the parents of Mr. and Mrs. L.P. Littleton. I attended Booker T. Washington High School here, which I graduated from high school here. Went on to college at Texas Southern University down at Houston for my first year. My freshman year I attended Midwestern University in Wichita Falls, Texas, and then the next couple of years at Texas Southern University down at Houston. However, I did not graduate because I just, times were hard and my parents were struggling, so I did not graduate, so I'm always been sorry about that, but I feel like that I have the knowledge that I was granted with, and I feel good about that. I feel good about myself.
Well, it sounds like you made your way almost through college.
I did, almost.
Can you tell me a little about your father?
My father was worked here in Cooper at the oil mill, and that was a bi-seasonal work. He worked there for many years, and as long as the oil mill was running, in which it just ran for just a few months out of a year. So the years that it wasn't running, we had it pretty hard sometimes, very hard.
What would he do when he was not working at the mill for employment?
My dad was a barber, not just by trade, not licensed, but he, as the old words say, he bootlegged haircuts to make some extra money right here in Cooper. So that was a supplementary income for him. And later my parents moved to Wichita Falls, Texas, and then my dad was employed in civil service out on the base at Shepherd Air Force Base, and he was employed there until he passed on.
And your mother?
My mother was born here in Cooper, Texas, to the parents of Tobe and Marianne Pollard. My mother was a domestic worker, which she worked as a maid here in Cooper. She worked for various white homes here as a maid, and these people that she worked for was very good to us as children growing up. I can remember on Christmas when we were just little children, there was a family here and they were called the Poes, P-O-E-S, the Poes. And every Christmas, Miss Poe would come right around the 23rd or the 24th of December, and she would have a box full of goodies for my mother's 3 children, which was me and my 2 brothers. And in this box would be filled with fruits, nuts, little ribbon type candies, and as a girl, for me, such things as a nice pair of warm gloves, maybe a scarf and socks, and maybe a coloring book in colors, and the boys would get like little toy soldiers, and we were very grateful, and I never forgotten those good things that she did for us. And then my mother also, when they moved from Cooper to Wichita Falls, my mother was also employed at Shepherd Air Force Base there until after losing my father. Then she moved back to Cooper until her death.
What kind of, can you recall her work schedule as a domestic?
She would go probably maybe like to work in the morning around 8 o'clock and maybe come home, I'd say probably around 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the evening. She would clean and she would cook and prepare the meals for various people here and just things like that.
So she was at home when you got home from school?
Most of the time, but not all the time. It just depended on whether these people had maybe like a dinner party or something. And then she would stay late to fix the food and things. But usually, as a rule, she was home usually around 3:30, something like that, or 4 o'clock.
Did you have chores around the house as a youngster?
Oh, did we have chores around the house? You bet we did. As a young girl, I would say, being about 12 years old, I could clean the house at that age just as good as my mother could, and I could also cook. I could prepare a meal just as good as my mother could. And by the time I was 12 years old myself, I was washing dishes. I was washing dishes for a couple of white families here, which was Mr. Manton and Mrs. Melvern Miller. And the pay was just so, I would go and wash dishes maybe say for like 50 cents per day, and then during that time washing dishes I could also sweep the kitchen floor, mop the kitchen floor and things like that. And a lot of things that Mrs. Melvern, she'd asked me one day if I knew how to make a peach cobbler. I told her sure I could make a peach cobbler. So she asked me to make her one. So when Mr. Manton came home for lunch that day, he had eaten his dinner and he commented on how good the peach cobbler was, and she looked at me and she winked her eye.
He thought she made it.
She thought she made it, but it was actually me that made it.
Any brothers and sisters?
I had two brothers. Mickey Littleton. Mickey was a profession by carpentry. He worked for some of the biggest builders there in Denver, Colorado, and also in Dallas. He was a master